Welcome to Hable Talks, the podcast about people and tech. This episode, we've got a guest which we're really excited to talk to you about and to introduce you to. Her name is Ruth Farenga. We've done a lot of work with Ruth over the last few months and got to know her really well. And this is a bit of a different podcast for her because normally she's hosting them. So I'm not sure how she's going to cope being a guest rather than the host, but we'll get her to talk more about her podcast in a minute. Firstly, though, I want to talk about Sean's very exciting new webcam. How are you, Sean? And how is your new webcam?
Fine. Yeah, thanks for bringing up my webcam. Yes, I've spent a little bit of money on a webcam. We had a bit of feedback, didn't we, that I looked like I had a lampshade for a head on the other recordings that we've done. So I wanted to dispel that myth and show that I have a real head and there is no lampshade on it.
Now everyone can see more of your office. They can see more of your office, see your comics on the wall, and see the door that your children may walk through at any minute.
True, yeah. So for those that can't see the video, that's a Dandy and a Beano in the corner there. The cornerstone of my childhood you're seeing. That's what shaped me. That was my formative years right there.
Very good. So it's very exciting. And we've explained to Ruth that this is only our second interview on Hable Talks. We're still learning the ropes, and she's promised not to judge us for our interviewing skills because she's way more experienced at this than we are. So Ruth, good morning.
Morning. So I'm a guinea pig. Is that the technical term?
Yeah, I think so. As you've already seen, off camera, we've not quite got the whole technical setup perfectly nailed just yet. We have got some good outtakes that maybe we'll bring back and use one day.
Yeah.
But for now, you're here. We're really glad to have you. And why don't you just introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and a bit about your background?
Sure, yeah. My name is Ruth Farenga and I'm founder of Conscious Leaders. So it's a leadership development consultancy and it's all about creating a calm, collaborative and productive workplace. And my background's in technology, so with Intel Corporation and before that in publishing, and a brief stint in the third sector before I set up my own business. So yeah, that's a very quick history of me.
Very good. And so Ruth and I met when she was at Intel and I was at Microsoft. And then our paths crossed again maybe a year or so ago when Ruth started doing some work with Hable. So maybe we can start off, just kind of take us back to the time at Intel and what it was like when you were at Intel and then leaving that big global company to go out on your own, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, Intel was a great company in many ways, had a really flat structure. I was actually previously an intern with Intel when I was a student in Germany, and then I was employed when I was in the UK, in Swindon. And yeah, it's a very flat structure. You normally get given an overwhelming amount of responsibility very early on, which is great in terms of like having responsibility and, having a lot of control over what you do and being creative. It's pretty tough. It was tough for me on stress because I was reasonably young at the time and had a lot of responsibility and felt that kind of, I guess the burden really that maybe I couldn't cope with all this stuff I had to do. So that's kind of when I looked into mindfulness as a practice, because I was having panic attacks at the time. Like my mental health was all over the place. Even though I loved the job and loved the role, I was also struggling at the same time. Don't know if you've ever had that, but the things can coexist. But I lived in Oxford at the time, and Oxford University does a lot of research into mindfulness. So yeah, that's when I got into that as a practice to kind of support me and my mental health while I was kind of working and like that.
So was that the first time you started researching or looking into the term mindfulness? And then maybe for people who don't feel clear on what mindfulness is, do you want to give us a bit of a definition or how you see mindfulness as a topic?
Yeah, it was absolutely then. And I'm really a non-fluffy person. So the idea of the word mindfulness, I was a bit like, kind of allergic to that, sounds fluffy. And then I found out that Oxford University has a whole department of mindfulness research. And I was like, And so does Harvard. And so does some of these other big universities around the world. So I was then like, okay, maybe there's something in this. And I set about doing training, which was it didn't promise me a quick fix, but it said if you practice and you do the group sessions, your brain will change effectively. So this isn't fluffy stuff, this is just neuroscience. Mindfulness, what it means is paying attention to what's happening in this moment the only moment we have, this very moment, with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. So it's really about cultivating the ability to be present and cultivating the ability to watch our experience with kindness and interest rather than self-criticism. Most people think it's about clearing the mind and sitting there like blissfully, like chilled out while all your thoughts just pass by. But it's not the reality of our minds. Our minds are busy. So it's more about developing awareness and returning to this moment. So that was kind of the difference for me. It was like, it's a practice, not a kind of some kind of quick fix.
And I think that's why I really enjoyed our conversations, because I had a certain perception about mindfulness. You know, I spoke to you about that at the start, and probably a lot like you, was probably cynical about it. But when I understood that Ruth had come from a background in a big American corporate, just like I had at Microsoft, it started to click. And you probably did have to persuade me quite a bit to do things like meditate at the start of a meeting or of a course. And I was really skeptical about that, but I really enjoyed it when we did it. So can you tell people about that as an idea and why you get people to do that at the start of even an event? I remember we did a Microsoft event and you got all of the customers to take a couple of minutes at the start, didn't you? So tell people a bit about that process and why it works at the start of a meeting.
Yeah, it's just like an opportunity to pause, really. So it's like a mini practice. A lot of us are running around, even if we're sat in front of our desks at the moment, we're running around mentally between meetings, maybe on back-to-back meetings. And oftentimes we're still carrying the energy from the previous part of the day or yesterday with us. So by taking a pause, sometimes I say, what's the weather pattern? So you might sit there, like sit upright, and then scan your body and ask yourself what the weather pattern is like inside. And by that you're doing like, where am I at? Oh, it's pretty stormy, kind of got a bit of a headache, I'm feeling calm. Whatever it is, you're just tuning in, like, where am I at right now? And that gives me some knowledge and data about how to behave in this meeting. Like, it might be that if I'm a bit worn down, I might just sit back a little and be on battery saving mode a little. Or if actually I'm really lively, I've got loads of energy, I might give a bit more. So I'm tuning into how I am, and then I'm taking the opportunity to be still briefly and just bring my attention back. So I'm cultivating focus at the same time. So yeah, a chance to pause, I think, and kind of ground ourselves.
I really like that. When we did that, as an experience for all of us at Hable, I think it helped us to be more self-aware of how we are. And I think that evolved a little bit over time to be then quite open with people as well at the start of a meeting and kind of say, I think I'm feeling a bit like this, just so you know. But what I was interested in was when you were talking about that, the mental health and well-being and mindfulness seems very topical right now. And I think lots of companies seem to be talking about it. But when you made that shift, how long ago was that when you left Intel to start this? And was it talked about then? Was it something that companies were aware of, people were aware of and thinking about in an organizational context?
Yeah, so this is I got into mindfulness about 11 years ago. And then I properly started developing things on the side about 8 years ago and started the business 6 years ago. When I first got into it, it definitely was still more in the kind of fluffy realm. Like there was people who were reading properly about it, were into it. But the problem with mindfulness is that you get different things get compared. So apples and pears, like you've had one meditation teacher who has done one weekend course is compared to someone like me who did 2 years of teacher training and has a supervisor at Oxford University. So back then it was more like an emerging topic. Now it is much more talked about. However, I still don't know how much practice is going on. So there is, people love talking about mindfulness. Oh yeah, mindfulness, yeah, I do it all the time. But how much do you practice? Now that could be a meditation practice, or it could be just practices in your day, like being with your cup of tea and spending some time with it, or being with difficult emotions and feeling them. That's mindfulness too. I think mindfulness, people think it's all just the lovely stuff, but it's also actually, I've got a knot in my stomach because that conversation was really difficult. I can really feel that right now. That's tough. I'm just going to breathe with it. I'm going to be aware of it as opposed to push it away. And that takes a shift to sit with difficult emotions. So it's quite a strong practice, I would say, as much as it is one of tuning into pleasant things. And yeah, attitudes have changed. I think it is moving more, or has moved more into the mainstream. But I still think a lot of people are kind of a bit nervous about it, or still think it's fluffy, or just compare it to some other kind of things that aren't evidence-based.
So Sean, do you want to talk a little bit about when Ruth started working with us as a leadership team? You know, both from those first sessions where we were actually in a room, we got to be face to face at least once with Ruth, and we all stopped and did a quick meditation at the start. And that was really the start of our journey as a leadership team, working with Ruth and going through that program. Do you want to tell people a bit about that and maybe the impact it's had on Hable?
Yeah, I remember one of the earliest sessions we did was around setting, I can't remember exactly the terminology, Ruth, forgive me, but it was almost like behaviours or how we were going to turn up as a group. And the context behind this was that, you know, we wanted to, as a leadership team, be as functional as we could possibly be as effective as we could possibly be, and then lead well, you know, in terms of enabling our organisation to thrive and people to reach their potential. And we recognised that we had a big responsibility to create the right environment for that, and therefore us working as a group was a key component. And I think you joined us at the point where we were, was it before COVID started that we first had our engagement, and then we moved into the sessions throughout COVID?
It was in between the lockdowns, wasn't it, in like September?
Yeah. And we had I remember the face-to-face one, and the first session we did, we had you in the morning, didn't we, which was going through these exercises with us. And then as a group, we had some really tough things to tackle in the afternoon when you'd moved on to your next appointment. And I remember how much more enabled we were as a group to work through and tackle those things, having been set up in the way that you did with us in the morning. And I think a lot of the work that we then saw as we worked through with you throughout different things, different practices, different tools and techniques that we learnt, had a similar effect. We were able to tackle things in a much more effective way in a really difficult time. You know, during a pandemic, we're a small company, we're trying to grow and change and evolve. We were much more effective as a team, and then we were able to pass on those practices to others in the company. One of the ones that stood out for me, Ruth, was your technique around listening. I think it'd be great if you could talk about that for a moment, because I think we all learned a huge amount from that.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, briefly, first, I'll sort of tell you about the transition between mindfulness and leadership development, because the business changed a bit, or quite significantly, and that was due to, as a very brief potted history, I was training people in workplaces on mindfulness, but I found it was a bit of a band-aid, because you could become mindfully aware of how unhappy you are at work, or it may not be preached from the top, but I'm training people in the grassroots. So I retrained as a professional coach and started developing leadership development programs, the stuff I was doing with you, incorporating some parts of mindfulness with it, because I found that for change to happen, it has to start at the top of an organisation. It has to start with how we behave, how we show up, and what kind of culture we want to create, what kind of behaviours we want to show, how we listen to each other, how we coach each other, and how we can kind of bring the best out of this community of leaders we have, this group. So yeah, that's how we got to there. But your question about listening, absolutely, listening is, I think it's the most underrated skill out there. Like, most people, in the nicest possible way, don't listen very well. And that's because there's a famous quote by Stephen Covey that says that listening is not about listening about the intent to reply, rather the intent to understand. So how much are you listening to understand instead? And simple practices that are kind of the foundations of coaching, where you ground yourself, you have deep faith and positive intention for the person you're listening to, and you're curious as well. You're interested about what they're about to say. You don't know. You don't say, oh yeah, you're about to say this, so I know what you're going to... You actually offer them your non-judgment and interest, and people feel that. So when you do a listening exercise, which is just the other person staying silent and you speaking, if the other person is grounded, that they are bringing their attention back each time it wandered, they believe in you, they look at you like, wow, you're amazing, you could do anything, and they're curious and non-judgmental, that shifts everything. And when a team starts doing that, then a whole load of generative conversations happen where the other person really feels heard and like their creativity is being listened to and they're expressing where they're at. And I think it's quite transformational.
So that specific exercise then, if people wanted to have a go at it, people who are listening or watching today, I remember it as a 3 minutes each exercise. Do you want to just break that down and tell people what you did with us that first time?
Yeah, so what you would do is, so you could say you're thinking about how you're reflecting on the pandemic. So you could say, right, everyone go off in pairs, either virtually or together, and share 3 minutes each way about what you've done well during this pandemic, like how you've shown up, what's been the best thing about how you've behaved, for example. Great listening exercise. Because people don't remember or notice sometimes all the things we've done well, we just concentrate on the negative. And one person's role is to be silent, so the listener would just be silent, and the other person speaks. But bring those three things: grounding, positive intention, and curiosity. So you don't give them the death stare. You're like interested, you're open.
The listener role is hard. People who know me will know that I'm not great at that. So the first minute of being silent, your brain, or my brain, is screaming, I just want to agree or encourage or come in and say something. And then you finally settle and go, actually, I'm not allowed to talk. And then you're kind of forced to be a better listener for that activity. That's what I found. Anyway.
So you feel like I'm switching the interviewee now. So you feel like this is this has been kind of a process for you with listening.
Yeah, I just remember we've done lots of brilliant workshops and we've had one-to-one coaching as well. But that listening activity probably is the one that's had the biggest impact on me. I'm still not saying I'm a great listener, as I proved just by cutting over you live on a podcast. But yeah, if people haven't tried that activity before, I would really recommend it. I thought it was a great thing to do.
Especially
and then
in
you
these...
basically swap. Sorry, carry on, Sean.
No, I was going to say, especially in these times as well, because when we did that listening activity, we were doing that remotely, we were doing that virtually, we were right in the middle of lockdown, and communication, I think, became very emphasised and exaggerated and just more crucial than ever. At that point, I think we were all relearning how to communicate effectively as an organisation, to each other, etc. Forbes published their top 10 trends for remote work, and asynchronous communication was one of those on there. And I just thought, actually, what we learned from you, Ruth, through that period on just how to listen effectively was so valuable. I mean, when you do we haven't spoken about your podcast yet, but you talk about this Conscious Leaders podcast, which I'd love to hear more about, and you have your guests on there. Do you find that the guests that you're speaking to are practicing these skills more and more now, and especially as we're going through times like we are?
It varies. Some it comes naturally to, and others are more kind of conscious their own self-development around it. But I also want to say that I also practice my listening skills. So I wouldn't want to say that. I often say with mindfulness as well, I say I'm not the finished product. I'm not like, I am still working on this stuff. And I think that's the same for any conscious leader, is that there's an effort to think about how they behave and how they show up for other people. So, and a key 21st century skill is certainly listening. If you want to get the best out of people and you want to hear, not at the superficial level how they're doing or what they could be doing next or what their next big idea is, but the next level down. And what if they believed they could do so much more? What would their ideas be like then? And sometimes, coaching can accentuate that, but even simple listening can really help someone show up at work, and personally too, in ways that they never even believed possible. Because I don't know if it's sometimes you may have ever been in a conversation where you've been there listening to the person and the person goes, oh my God, thanks so much. And you're like, I literally didn't do anything. And it's because you listened, you were really there for them, and they walk away like, that was so useful. And it's such a major thing that we don't realise. But like Mark said, it's not always an easy role. Like, our minds are wandering, we want to give advice, we want to and it doesn't mean we never give advice, we're never directional, but it means that could we hold back that bit more and ask a bit more about that thing, like tell me more about that, or just let them run on, because who knows where this could go if we let them speak more.
You're so right, and I different to Mark, I came into our session thinking I was a good listener. I used to say to people that, I was blessed with no hair, didn't encumber my ears, and therefore I could listen really well. And I thought I was a good listener. But what I realized was that I listened to the point where I could fix it, or I thought I could fix something. And then I wanted to jump in immediately and fix the problem and help somebody. So you're right. It's like a constant evolution, isn't it? A constant iteration to get better at this.
And have you changed that culturally in an organisation? Because Sean and I are both from Microsoft, which I think we'd both say was a brilliant place to work. But if I think about being in a meeting at Microsoft, 10 people in the room, most of them very bright, and often the most senior person kind of holds court. Or when I was there, certainly. Culture has changed in the last 6 years since I left. But I remember the kind of most senior person in the room kind of holding court, and then somebody else, me, really feeling like I wanted to kind of jump in and say something, but say something smart. And there was a real kind of competition almost in that quick hour that you've all got together to get airtime and to be heard, for your own personal profile. And so your team think you're smart, and so you can share your ideas. And it seems like in a big company like that, it would be very difficult to change the culture to be more one of listening, right? Hopefully in a smaller company like ours, it would be easier, but in a big company, that must be really difficult to change a culture like that.
Yeah, I guess all this starts at the top, but you might find departments or teams that could develop a really great culture of listening quite quickly, just because they show up for each other in that way. You talked to something else then, Mark, which was quite interesting. You also mentioned that there's maybe one person holding court and everyone else is trying to be a little bit impressive or something with their comments. And this points to psychological safety, which is kind of the opposite of that, where we give people equal time to speak. Now, we don't always have time for that, so I don't want to say that we can always do that. But in a creative meeting, or when we're trying to do a post-mortem on an event or something else that happened, or we want to think about how we dial up performance in the team, to take 2 or 3 minutes with each person, everybody else stay silent, no interrupting, is an amazing way to start drawing creativity out of people that maybe don't really contribute always, but give them permission, and knowing that no one will interrupt really helps them come out of their shell. And because otherwise we're not using that creativity that's sat there with them, because they may not have felt permission to share it in the most comfortable way before.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from Microsoft people, if they're listening, in the comments about whether things have changed, because certainly Satya is a very different leader to Barma, who was the leader when, in fact, he was just leaving as I was joining.
Yeah.
If there are Microsoft people listening, I'd love to know what the internal meeting cultures, don't get fired or anything by, saying anything, that'll get you in trouble. But I'm just fascinated about that big culture and how you kind of move the tanker both towards mindfulness and better listening.
On that point on psychological safety, Ruth, have you seen a shift around that topic in what your clients are asking you for over the last period of time since we've been in the pandemic? How's that changed?
I mean, I see a lot of desire around it. I don't think people always know how. I work with a lot of young progressive tech companies who want to kind of to show up more for their employees. They really want a fun, fair culture, and to a certain extent they're normally getting there, but they also find that for speed purposes and because we just need to get stuff done, that sometimes people do get a little bit mowed down or overlooked or not included, and yet they know that inclusion and all this type of stuff is so important to their staff. So I see in patchy ways, some people are great at it and others, they're just going so fast that they're not sure how they do it in parallel. And they haven't intentionally thought about what behaviours they want to offer for each other, like we did at the beginning of our programme. And sometimes some things as simple as that and some conscious effort to listen to each other can really shift everything about how we behave for each other, not just for ourselves. And it's so easy to be focused on ourselves, and if we just widen out our empathy and understanding of other people, then we start to behave in the interests of the group and ourselves and the company, and then all the virtuous circle starts happening. It affects business performance as much as it does the enjoyability of being at work.
And what's your opinion on how that might play out then? So if that's the situation for companies and what they're aspiring to do, if we shift to this world where maybe a hybrid model is, people working in different locations that maybe used to being in an office, how do you see that impacting that dynamic?
How do I see what impacting it?
So if you're looking to achieve psychological safety as an organization, and maybe you've been trying to do that when predominantly 90% of your workforce is office-based in meeting rooms, and everyone's on an equal footing in terms of their, like Mark's context of being in a meeting room and having the ability to speak, or voice your opinions. How do you see this shift where most organizations, or a lot of, will not have all of their workforce now in an office, and some people will be mostly working from home or dialing in from other locations? Does that impact the ability of an organization to provide an environment that is psychologically safe for everyone? Should they be conscious and intentional in different ways to achieve that?
I mean, hybrid working throws up a lot of issues around this, and I think I said we could do a whole podcast just on this theme because it's coming up a lot for clients. I do think we do need to be a bit more intentional about it, because if there is a hybrid situation where some people are in the office and some people are working from home predominantly, you might end up with some people getting a lot of visibility with senior people, for example, and others not. Or some people getting heard a lot and others not. But there's no reason why a fair setup couldn't be taken into consideration. So whether it be certain key meetings are online that make sure they include everyone, or we get everyone in for certain key meetings, or for young people who maybe they want to work from home but they're not going to get much visibility or mentoring, that they're paired up with people for buddying or mentoring, or just a lunch once a month to kind of think about how their career growth is going, how they're developing. Because a lot of young people will, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of young or inexperienced people will watch others to think about how they grow, and you can do that online to a certain extent, but it is also nice to be with people. So it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in the office the whole time or 3 days a week, whatever, but what are the opportunities, if that question is how do we help our more inexperienced staff grow, where are the opportunities for them to learn from others? Could we make that happen so that we don't sort of leave some people behind, because we're all like, oh, we're all fine online, yeah, I don't need that, and it'd be a long commute for me anyway. We sort of take inclusion into account, and listening is a great way of doing that. Like, get together as a team, think about what issues are showing up for us with hybrid working, what would be our ideal situation, but also what would be an ideal situation both for the group and for me. So could I think about some of those younger staff members as well as myself and the company? So there's a bit of a kind of collective sharing there of what works best for all of us. How can we work together as a group so that we're the best performing team and can enjoy life and work the most?
Okay. So do you think, as leaders of an organisation, the first step is being kind of conscious and working on yourself and your own skills, and then kind of cascading those behaviours down an organisation? Is that the shift you made when you went from the brand, mindful leadership to the brand conscious leaders? Was that about getting higher up the organisation because leaders are the only ones that can truly drive a change?
Yeah, and you can get grassroots change, so I don't want to say that that's not possible, but if you start working at the bottom, then you can get a real disconnect. So when people say, oh, can you come in and sort out this team? I'm like, that's great, but could you come back here? Because it would be great to think about how you run the business and what the culture is like. And you said it there. It starts with ourselves. A lot of people with the self modules, I have to go, oh, we can skip that, we've done that, we don't need it. And you're like, oh, really? Okay. Because I need self-awareness and I work on this stuff all the time. So that's like our habits, things like mindfulness. Doesn't have to be mindfulness if you're not interested. Things like values, things like strengths. So how do I show up in the world? How aware am I of how I behave? That's step one. Step two is how do I interrelate, listening, coaching other people, really showing up for others. And step three is the wider culture, like you said, the employees, how this proliferates, what kind of ways of working do we want to have around here? Whether we're virtual or face-to-face, what does it feel like to work for Hable, or what does it feel like to work for Microsoft? Like that's the that's that kind of broader vibe that can proliferate. And yet the behaviour of the top team, especially if they're a medium-sized or small to medium-sized business, if the budget is limited, start at the top. If there's not much money, start by me coaching or someone like me coaching the CEO. And then if there's more, let's work with the top team. And then we can work with employees later, because that really helps. You know, you're teaching them just by the way you behave and the way you show up. That's powerful.
Great. So let's talk about something slightly different. What do you tell people about the Conscious Leaders podcast? Maybe about some of the guests that you've interviewed and what people can expect if they go and find your podcast online.
Yeah, sure. And it is a bit strange actually, be in the other seat and be like under the microscope. No, not really. It's very comfortable with you guys. But so Conscious Leaders podcast, it came from my research, which basically said that leaders like learning from other leaders. So they are interested in my training and content and things like that, but they also like learning from people, from other CEOs and founders, and what really works well for them. And I also like positive messages, messages that are honest, but there's kind of great practice behind it. So I don't want to showcase bad things, I want to showcase great things. So I set about finding leaders who are doing something more radical or innovative with the way they lead their people, and they're pushing boundaries on it to show up for staff in new ways. And they also talk about the bottom line and how it's affecting the business. So these are commercial businesses where the leaders are really developing themselves and how they work on the business. And yeah, we've had, I think there have been 17 episodes now, and it started February of last year. One of the most recent ones was with the founder of Riverford, the veg box company, and they just moved to employee ownership. So the founder gave away almost £15 million worth of equity, which in itself is like mind-blowing. And he saw such an amazing shift in the way people looked out for each other in the company as co-owners. There are 1,000 co-owners of Riverford. And other examples where there's just like a lot of autonomy in the business or a lot of compassion. There's one company called The Dots, run by Pip Jameson, and they do remote working really well, and they offer a huge amount of co-support and compassion for each other. They buddy up once a week and have like an informal coffee, catch up. They have thank you Fridays. She does a survey once a quarter to find out how happy everyone is and what they would do if they were the CEO. Like, she's tuning into the business all of the time. And
who was the guy that there was an episode where everybody had to publish publicly what they thought their own salary should be?
Yeah, that was Daniel.
What was that? That fascinated me, that story.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if they're doing it anymore, because it may not be. But it was innovative. And so Daniel Hulme, who is CEO of Satalia, they're an artificial intelligence company, they had a system whereby we all decide each other's salaries. And so say I worked 1/8 with you, Mark, I'd have 1/8 for say in your salary. And there was this very complex algorithm that would decide exactly how this works. But because they're an AI company, they're good at this stuff. And you'd be given information like the benchmark for that role in the market. And then even an intern might have more of a say than him over someone because they work with them more. So he was trying to eliminate as much bias as possible. Because if he's like, well, if I like someone, well, I might give them more of a raise. But that doesn't mean that that's a fair estimation of their performance. So yeah, that was a really good one. Yeah, it's I think what's nice is to hear, like, what I seek to do is find out the philosophy of the leader, but also find out how it plays out practically. Like you may remember Andy Woodfield,
PwC.
He's a partner at PwC. He's also become quite a good friend. He's a great guy, but he's really into being candid and upfront at work. So he would talk about that as in principle, so how you be both giving like directness and compassion. So very upfront with people, but like kind of show up, but I love you, like a sports coach. He was really up in your face and kind of demanding, but caring, and that I think that's really powerful as a leader. And he would talk about
what's the live event idea? Because he's going to do a Conscious Leaders live soon, right? Yeah,
that's on the 17th of June. I'm not sure if it's after this has gone out, but it basically, people listen to his podcast and then come back for a live Q&A with him. So that's
great.
An opportunity to delve deeper into that and into, because some of these people are really impressive, like really got great stuff to share. But I find with guest events, often someone shares something and then they leave, or there's 2 questions at the end. But what if you've got loads of questions for this person? Then you get to delve more into their mind and what motivates them, how it works practically, to learn more, essentially.
That's really interesting. And I bet you've learned so much by doing that, and listening to the ones that I've listened to. I listened to one this morning. I find they're really interesting, the different perspectives you've managed to get and the different experiences and the different types of leaders. It's been really good to listen to. I'd encourage anybody to listen to it. I'm sure we'll find a way of sharing the link through some form through this. So we'll make sure we publish that, Ruth.
Yeah, I think I'm keen that it's a learning resource. Like, it's freely available, and learning from other leaders like that is, I think, a great way of kind of growing as a person.
Well, yeah, that was our experience through you as well, because I joined some of your workshops, which were those networking workshops where you were, a leader in your own organisation, going through learning about, listening or having difficult conversations, but with other leaders in other companies. And you're right, those breakout rooms on, a platform that wasn't Microsoft Teams, were really interesting, because you met these other leaders. Sorry, Microsoft, it only happened once. It won't happen ever again. And I hated every minute of the technology. Loved the experience. Heavily caveated. But that experience of learning from other leaders as they were going through that was as valuable as the content. It was really, really good to go through. So I think your research clearly resonated with me on that.
That's good.
On your personal journey then, so as you've been through all of this, if you look back to before you left Intel and when you were going through your internship and all this kind of stuff, is this where you saw your future? Is this how you saw things panning out? And is this what your ambition was at that time, as you were early in career?
No, I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was that I liked variety and I really liked people. Like, I love people. So even really difficult people. I think they're amazing. But I don't think I knew what I was doing from the beginning. In fact, what helped me realise what I was doing was taking my own coach, because I realised halfway through my coaching that I was like, I don't really want to work for anyone else. And she was like, brilliant, I think you're fully marketable. And that was like a nice moment, because I was looking at jobs when I left, because I moved from Intel to the third sector briefly, but it didn't really suit me that well. And I'd done this mindfulness teacher training, interested in coaching, but I wasn't sure what I was doing. So I took this coach on, and it was an interesting process of being like, I was just looking at jobs like, I don't want to do any of these jobs. Like, maybe for one day a week, but I don't want to do them all week. But I knew that I loved people so much, and I knew that I wanted to help people kind of get the most out of their work and their life. Because I think we can have a great time at work, really enjoy each other's company, really go places, make money, have a good time, or things can be really, really shit, really tough. And we can make each other's lives really difficult. We can really struggle financially, we can struggle personally, and we can really resent meetings or not look forward to stuff. And it's just not necessary. With the right conscious effort, we can all move in a direction that's much more enjoyable and profitable. And so it feels like there's so much good work to be done that, I guess I've just got a passion for it, really.
And both of you, listening to both of you as two entrepreneurs, you both left big companies and went out on your own and started your own thing. I took the far less risky option of letting Mark start it and then joining it when it was far more secure. But, it's very inspirational to listen to both of you, how you talk about that. I don't know if you noticed, Ruth, but when Mark was, a long time ago when he was at school, when it was chalk and, blackboards and all that kind of stuff.
Still had the cane, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, they hadn't developed the cane yet, I don't think, at that point. But back then, Mark wanted to be a DJ. That was one of his ambitions before he realised that he's not cool enough for that. But back at that time, Ruth, when you were younger, did you have I'm going to do this. This is my plan. I think I can see myself growing older and doing this kind of career.
Not really. I remember doing one of those stupid career tests, which I think told me I should be a vet or something. And I was like, is that just because I like animals? But I wouldn't say I had an idea. I thought about law, but then I'm not very good at like ultra detail, so that was out the window. I wasn't sure what I
remember
do.
those school tests. It was like a list of questions, and it was at secondary school you took that route.
Yeah, it was rubbish, wasn't it? Has anyone ever become the thing that they...
I'm going to share now what mine was, which is a little bit embarrassing.
Go on.
I could ask you to guess, you wouldn't. So mine was that I should be a librarian.
Because you were dull.
I know. I don't know what I answered. I remember taking it in a library, and I thought maybe that's what's happened here. But
maybe it was
I
your
didn't expect
surroundings.
it. I didn't go and tell my parents when I got home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mine was PE teacher. I said I like football, I like sport, PE teacher.
Yeah, but they're like oversimplistic, aren't they? They're like, you hear your interests. What were your interests in, Sean? Quiet rooms and books.
I don't know. I've just been looking at books. I've no idea
Being
what
on
happened
my
to
own,
me.
Being on my own.
not talking.
Yeah. I don't know what happened to me there. And I don't know why I've just shared that either. That's something I thought I would never tell anybody about. So let's hope we don't get
There's still time, Sean. There's loads of time.
True. Maybe this is later on in life. Maybe I'll have an allotment and a library or something, yeah.
I'm fascinated about whether some of the skills we've talked about, like mindfulness, like coaching, like listening, could be more part of kids' experience at school. You know, Sean and I have spoken, you know, on previous episodes about the education system and how it is or isn't, in my opinion, kind of fit for purpose in getting kids ready for the modern world. And I wonder whether things like this, that even in business are seen as nice to have, should be brought down an age group and tackled at school. I mean, can you imagine how that might work, Ruth? How could we get young people being more in tune with who they are and what they want to be, and getting them to be better listeners, and some of those skills that businesses desperately want but schools just don't tackle at all?
Yeah, I mean, I can see starting with staff would be a great way, because they'd be role modelling it, and no doubt some staff are great at it, others not. Because also teaching staff, if we're totally generalising, are quite stressed and have a huge workload and you know, so many factors pulling in different directions, that if they allowed more time to listen to each other and co-support each other, they might make the journey a lot easier, and then that would release some stress for being present with the children too. So yeah, I would start with staff and maybe the head teacher. Often head teachers have come through a very administrative route. They're really good at like that stuff, and many of them are amazing, but I wonder sometimes they can lose a little bit of the soft skill occasionally, that it means that some of the staff then find it harder to relate. This is a complete generalisation, but I have seen it quite a bit, that, you know, if the head teacher can still be a really good human being and connect with staff in amongst all of the admin and pressures, then that's a skill that can really motivate staff as well.
Yeah, but probably in the state sector in particular, where money is tight, that would need somebody to prioritise that from a budget perspective. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because you were very kind of open on LinkedIn recently and kind of posted about a few customers who essentially didn't have the budget to work with an organisation like you to focus on some of these sort of softer skills. So I was going to ask how that kind of is personally at the moment. Has lockdown made it tough because budgets are tight? And then secondly, what's the impact on an organisation if they don't prioritise these things? Because, you know, in the long term, surely trying to find the money for that kind of thing is going to benefit organisations, isn't it?
Yeah, and it has been tough, I'll be completely frank with you. It has been quite tough recently. I think, particularly with people coming out of lockdown, there's some sort of hesitancy about how we should behave, how things are going to happen, how people are going to adapt or not adapt. And I think people can be like, well, let's just keep our heads down and then we'll sort it out in September or whatever. But I think it does miss a trick on how do you want to come out of lockdown? How do you want to support people? Because people might get a bit run over in the meantime, whether unconsciously or not. And the opportunity cost is things like, you know, is that new leader going to be strong enough to handle that new role they've been given? That person who's just had issues outside of work, are they being supported through this? And I know it's difficult for businesses to think about where the line is between personal support and work support. But we are like human beings. We bring our divorce to work. We bring our difficult child situation. We bring whatever it is to the office or to the virtual office. We just have it with us. So if we can lean in and say, like, let's help us develop ourselves as a collective, how we behave together and individually, then that pervades everything. It pervades how productive we are at work, but also how we are in our personal life. And all that virtuous circle can start to go up again, where people have been struggling and maybe going more like this. So it is a challenge at the moment. I think businesses are holding back quite a lot, but I think this stuff is urgent. Like, let's do it now, because it will affect the bottom line too, and it will affect how people grow. And if people grow, the businesses can grow too.
And when you're in a difficult time like that, do you ever look back on, working for a big American corporate and think, you have any regrets ever about starting your own company? Or are you glad you're where you are?
No, I mean, obviously a stable monthly pay packet is nice, but I feel a little bit unemployable in that way as well. Yeah, it is tough when you can't predict things as easily. And I guess I'm better at looking after myself, and I'm okay to ask for help and say, I'm struggling now, I need support, I need a day off, or I need a break from, meetings or whatever. That's kind of in my experience now. But yeah, I think I'm too passionate about this stuff and kind of probably want to do it a bit more my own way to go and work for anyone else, unless I'll be like, one of the top team maybe one day of something small. I think I'm not going to be working for a corporate again, I don't think.
I like the way you said unemployable now. That was a good way.
Basically unemployable. Yeah.
But your bravery in posting that message on LinkedIn that Mark's referring to, where you kind of said, I'm being really honest, things are tough at the moment. I thought that was so. I just found it really inspiring that you did that, and we spoke that day, which I was really pleased that I had that time with you, and but I just found it really inspiring, because as with any part of social media, which does have an impact on well-being, people put up this front, don't they? A shop window front. This is my life, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn to a professional degree. Everything's going really well, and I'm posting things that I want other people to perceive me as. And you doing that, I think, it just shows that the power of somebody just being honest and authentic about what's going on. So it had a really good impact on me, on my well-being that day, to see, right, somebody's being really honest. I want to connect with them and see if I can support them. And I just thought it was a really good thing to do.
Yeah, well, thanks for acknowledging that. And I think you're right. Everyone acts on, especially LinkedIn, like everything's perfect. And I nearly deleted that post. So, it was about how I was struggling that day, and I'd had another knockback, and I was just floored by it. I was like, this is really tough. I nearly deleted the post, but I thought, no, this is tough, and I'm going to share it because I need some support. I actually could do with people rallying around me a bit. And I've had quite a few offers of help, both practical, emotional, just from friends, business contacts, and I've taken it as well, because it's quite easy to say I'm struggling and then be like, no, I'm fine, I'll be all right. But actually I'm trying to say yes to things like that, because it's kind of, I guess, practicing what I preach a bit, being a bit vulnerable and saying, yeah, if you could help me, that'd be fab, or because I'd certainly show up for someone else like that. So it actually is a good step to take help as well. It's easy for us to say no to that.
Great. Well, we've only got time for a couple more questions. The last topic I wanted to ask you about was about ambition. And what does ambition mean to you? And what are your ambitions for yourself and for conscious leaders in the future?
That's a big question, isn't it? What does ambition mean to me? Ambition is, I think I want to be supporting as many people as I can. And to work with them, as many sort of senior people in especially small to medium-sized businesses as I can. I do work with some corporates, but I find that with the small to medium-sized businesses, we can make big shifts. So I want to carry on growing that. But I also have got aims about building a community of leaders. And this is really early days, so who knows where this will go. But I think there's a power in CEOs, founders coming together to do co-coaching and co-listening work with each other, and create an environment where we use those kind of behaviours, because I think we're starved of that a little bit in society. And if you had a really high quality network that also could show up for each other like that I think could be really powerful. So I'm sort of sowing seeds and doing a bit of experimentation at the moment, but I know that leaders learn so much from each other, like you said, Sean, outside of their business when they come outside with others. So I'm thinking about how that can happen too, because I think that's powerful.
That's great. So if any leaders listening, and this is the final question, wanted to get hold of you, find out more about your work, or listen to the podcast, where should people go online to find out about Conscious Leaders? Yeah,
it's just consciousleaders.org.uk, and I'm on Twitter because I'm a Twitter person, LinkedIn and places like that. But do get in touch if you fancy a chat or interested in exploring, because I think it's all about enjoying life and doing great business at the same time. Both are possible. I'm really keen to hear from people who want to make a difference really in their business and the people that they lead. That's really exciting.
Good. I do have one more question, Mark.
Okay, shoot.
Ruth, you mentioned earlier on, this is a very important question, you mentioned earlier on that you've worked with some really difficult people. Mm-hmm. Now, out of Mark
mainly
and I...
you, should know.
Okay, good. You preempted my question. I was going to ask who was the most difficult out of Mark and I. No, I just want to, I guess, to finish with saying, you helped me personally and us as an organisation to go through some, really difficult times during a pandemic as we were growing as a company. And me, as I was going through my mental health challenges, you helped me and you were a part of that recovery. So, I thank you to you for all of that, is the first thing. And the second thing, I think, any companies that are going through changes, evolving, growing, that want their leadership team to be, really highly effective, that want to provide an environment for their people that enables them to get the best out of them and reach their potential, highly recommend speaking to Ruth. But thank you for being a guest with us today.
No, I really appreciate it.
Hope you've enjoyed being a guest rather than a host.
Yeah,
in our kind of haphazard questioning style.
I feel like we're going to get feedback after this, Mark. I feel like there's going to be like a Ruth debrief. These are the things you did wrong.
I think we're going to press stop in a second, and we're going to get coached about our podcasting.
And we'll need to listen.
Honestly, though, you'd be great.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.